So we're about ready to get started again after our break, so we'll be picking up with Joshua Dalzelle. Joshua Dalzelle is a U.S. Today best-selling science fiction author and Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University alumnus whose work blends technical insight with imaginative storytelling. After earning his Bachelor of Science in Professional Aeronautics and a Master's in Aeronautic Science through Embry-Riddle's Worldwide campus, he built a career grounded in aviation and aerospace, including service as an avionics technician in the U.S. Air Force and work in the aerospace industry. Dalzelle's deep knowledge of engineering and flight informs his acclaimed Omega Force and Black Fleet series, where spacefaring crews and interstellar conflicts come alive with scientific realism and gripping adventure. So we will switch it over to Joshua Dalzelle.
All right. How's everybody doing this morning? Thanks for having me. Thank you to Dr. Reynolds for the invite to speak this morning. Today I want to talk to you about where science meets storytelling and why these two are not mutually exclusive, why they can coexist together. There's going to be some overlap between this presentation and the last one and the general concepts of how creativity can inform the technical world and vice versa. So who I am. My name is Joshua Dalzelle. I enlisted in the Air Force right out of high school. Worked on B-1Bs as an avionics technician. Been pretty obsessive with flight and airplanes and rockets since I was a little kid. Worked at Lockheed Martin for a few years after I got out of the Air Force. Transitioned over to L3 Communications with the space vehicle avionics section and worked on test systems there. Probably, and during that whole time, there had been the thread of wanting to be a writer. Lots of query letters to agents, blind submissions to publishers, and nothing ever really got traction for me. And so I just sort of kept it, in the drawer as a hobby. And then I guess it was about 2012, I discovered independent publishing. And so I figured, well, this is my last chance to see if I just have any traction at all in this. So I cleaned up one of my old manuscripts, got it publishable, put it on Amazon, and it took off. So by 2013, I was having enough success that I was pretty excited about this. I thought this was going to be a good hobby that was a income booster. And then by 2014, I'd actually started earning enough income that I had to kind of make a decision if I wanted to do one or the other, but both were suffering because of the time crunch. So I went full-time writing. A lot of people thought I was absolutely insane. At the time I was on track, I was wanting to go into program management and had been wanting to work on the Delta IV Heavy program. And then kind of in their minds, I threw it all away to be a writer. And a lot of people didn't understand it. And but since then it's, I've had a few million sales, had Hollywood's come knocking. I've had best-selling books, 12 or 13. And the point of that is that sometimes you have to be willing to take the risk. And a lot of us, especially technical-minded people, are very risk-averse or analytical in this. So just do the math on what your time is worth, what you can earn, and what your obligations are. And sometimes it's worth it. Sometimes it doesn't work out. But thankfully, I was able to parlay this into a full-time job. But even if it just stays a hobby and it's supplemental income, there's a lot to be said for that. So a lot of people see these as two separate worlds. And to be fair, I'm going to be talking about storytelling through the lens of science fiction because that's what I do. And I think that's the most direct connection to what we do at Embry-Riddle. So one side is it just tyrannically adheres to calculation, empirical data. The other is allowed to run wild and sometimes to its detriment. A lot of bad science fiction out there that's not grounded in reality. And science fiction readers are savvy and they can tell who has done the research and who has a background, who doesn't. What I have discovered is that there's a vast readership that wants both these things. They want them to coexist together. A lot of engineers read and they want to read something that somebody's put the time in and done a good job with it. Hard science and scientific discovery will fuel people's imagination and storytelling. Famously, Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barzoom trilogy was based on the theory that there were canals on Mars. That was made popular by a guy named Percival Lowell, who speculated that the lines on Mars were canals and evidence of a advanced culture. You know, the theory ended up being bunk, but the point is that the discovery of that sparked somebody's imagination and led to, you know, a series of books that is now considered, you know, essential reading and a modern classic. And there's an inverse relationship to this as too, which is more in line with what I want to talk about, which is your storytelling can inspire science and innovation. Many notable examples. You know, cell phones were from Star Trek communicators, tablet devices, AI, submarines were inspired by Jules Verne's internet credit card. A lot of these cases, technologies we consider mundane today have now even surpassed the wildest imaginations of writers from even 20 years ago. And a lot of these were engineers and scientists who were driven to research. They wanted to see the world that they had read about, and they forced it into reality. And you know, that's sort of the power that a writer can have over society in that way. So the case study is my book Warship, which was published in 2015. This was an attempt to write. So prior to this series, I had written a series called A Megaforce, very campy, very light science, a lot of I guess you would call it space magic, but it was not meant to be a serious. It was lighthearted. It was an adventure. This was an attempt to write something gritty and grounded, and something that the technology is underpinned by what we know could be possible today. The engines in the ships are derived from the Vasamer engines developed by Ad Astra. Even the faster than light travel was adapted from Miguel Alcubierre's warp drive, real orbital mechanics, time distance calculations. There's all this stuff that I learned at Embry-Riddle. I needed to make this book as realistic as I could possibly do it. And this was the first time I really had a real good merging of these two, where the had to be compelling with characters and a story that people wanted to read about, but also the science and the math had to be close enough and accurate to be believable, or the whole thing would kind of fall apart. The result was this book was released in January 2015, and it went deep in the top 100 overall of Amazon. And this was a time when most science fiction wasn't, maybe in the top 500s, 400s. And it stayed there for a while. It was a 2015 Goodreads Choice nominee for Science Fiction Book of the Year. It's been optioned recently for a movie from Breck Eisner's group, who did The Expanse. And so the big thing about this book compared to the other ones I wrote, that people were really taken by the realism of the science. They liked that. And if you can really weave that into a compelling narrative, you will suck people into your world, even if they don't fully understand it. There's a competency that kind of comes through your writing that they'll respond to. This kind of captures the core of what I want people to take away. And bearing in mind that when I say storytelling, I am talking specifically about science fiction, but there is crossover if you write thrillers and especially crime thrillers, things like that. There's a sweet spot between these two where they coexist, and they can make each other stronger. You're not just building realistic machines and worlds, you're building a world that you want to suck your readers into. And so having both of these skill sets working in tandem with each other, it will really take a good story and make it a great story, whereas bad science will take a good story and make it an unreadable story. And people also respond to that. Just my other series, like I said, the Megaforce stuff is very Star Warsy in its approach to science, and there's a large base that doesn't like that. They want things defined, and they want it to be realistic. And this sort of leads me to this. Visualize the relationship as an infinite feedback loop. Real science and engineering create the foundations. The dreamers and the storytellers take that and use it to inspire the next generation. And the cycle continues, and progress marches on and on and on. All these things will all kind of exist in this infinite loop together. We don't have to separate the science from the art, and I think sometimes we do that as a disservice to both, where in reality they coexist very well. So why write besides the money and the leisurely lifestyle? Exercising your creative muscles will sharpen your problem-solving skills. It bolsters communication skills and ability to convey complex ideas. Whether you write as a hobby or have dreams of making financial success, or simply you're just an avid reader, and there's a lot to learn and strengthen and add to your skills developing now that you can use in the technical arena and vice versa. If you do have aspirations of being a writer, being strong in these technical fields will strengthen that. They're complementary skill sets. They're not adversarial or even disassociated. So if it seems like I'm really hammering on this point, where it's redundant, I am. It's important to design and build things that competently fill a need. That's what engineering is there's a need, you design something to accomplish a task, to do a function. But there's also something beautiful about making things that serve no practical purpose whatsoever other than to satisfy the human need to explore. A lot of what we do, especially in space exploration, manned or unmanned, doesn't have a ton of practical application for us here on Earth, but it's about inspiring us as a species to move further, to reach further. It's something that's unique to us. Storytelling is something that lets you leave an imprint on the people who are going to come after you. It could outlive you. It could be something that, a book could be read by thousands of people, and they're just that one person that will be the one that designs. There'll be a breakthrough in a technology, and they did that because they read one of your stories, and that's you can indirectly shape the future whether you'll ever know it or not, and that's there's something very, very satisfying about that, even if you're not necessarily not about taking credit for anything, but it's about knowing that you contributed. There's nothing wrong from living in both worlds. Nothing keeping you there. There's the left brain, right brain fallacy. That was who was the guy? Roger Sperry was the scientist that kind of coined that, and we use it now as kind of an idiom. But before, there was people really thought that you were either left brain or right brain dominant, and those two halves were either analytical or creative. And what we find is that the brain works together to do both functions. These aren't separate aspects of our personality. They're things that either are nurtured or suppressed, or that we have aptitudes for. If you find you're interested in trying to write, you probably have an aptitude for it. If you find you're a voracious reader, you probably have an interest in it. I would encourage everybody, just as a mental exercise, short stories, anything that you could pin down, to just exercise and really work that muscle, and you'd be surprised maybe what is lurking in there, and maybe the kernel of an idea that you can nurture and develop into a full-blown narrative. I have a deep love and passion for both engineering and creative endeavors. I'd be perfectly happy doing either. There's things I like about both. On the writing side, the pay is better, and I like the leisurely lifestyle. I don't have an alarm clock. I kind of do what I want when I want. But I really do miss the side of even the dreaded meetings. I miss being part of a team and problem solving, and the technical aspect of building something that has to fill a function in a larger part. And that's something that I really don't have anymore. So you will find that you miss one or the other. This was the path I picked, and maybe going back, if you could find a better balance of being both an engineer or a pilot and just writing on the time. There's some Embry-Riddle writers that are airline pilots that also write novels and publish them, and that's they find a nice balance in that. So you're building the tools now to do whatever you want, even if you find that it's not originally what you thought you were going to do. What I learned at Embry-Riddle served me both as an engineer and as a writer. So if you take anything away from this, I hope it's that even though you're pursuing a STEM degree and likely a technical career, or as a pilot or an engineer, don't look at your humanities classes as something you just need to get through to get the degree. There's a lot to be pulled away there to both bolster your technical prowess, but you may find something in there that you really, really are drawn to, and it may take you in a direction you didn't expect. So this is missing a couple slides, so I think I've run through a little faster than I would have liked. I can go back and touch on any other points anybody wants to talk about, or any questions, and anybody have anything?
We can see, yes, we have a question from the audience. So we have a microphone here. We have some questions.
Hi, thank you so much. I know you probably, can you see me?
I can see the
Disembodied
podium.
voice. Okay, cool. Thank you. As a professor of humanities at Embry-Riddle, it's so nice to hear you say that the students don't have to just begrudgingly get through my classes. So I'm curious, I have lots of questions for you, and congratulations on your career. But during your Embry-Riddle coursework, or even your coursework, I saw that in Cincinnati you got your associate's degree. Was there a humanities or literature class that stood out to you that was like, this is working, and I know you've always liked writing, but is there one course that stood out to you, a literature course in any of your degree programs?
There was, I took a creative writing course, and the instructor, and I apologize, I cannot remember her name, but was absolutely excellent, and did a great job of finding a way to kind of draw me in and break down larger narratives and how you construct these, because you start to, if anyone's ever tried to write a novel, the very first time you do it, it's like it's like a presentation you ran through. It's like, well, that should have gone longer, and I'm not sure why it's so short. So trying to get something out to an 80,000 word narrative is tricky, and she was able to through this class break down the act structure and then how this looks on. It's like, okay, now, like basically engineering a full length narrative. And then the other classes that really, really helped in character development, I took psychology classes too, and they were really fundamental in how I was able to build characters that were much less, cardboard cutout. They were very three-dimensional, and without being, cliche or caricatures.
Thank you so much. I'm going to reach out to you and request that you make me like a little video to kind of amp up our gen ed courses, and then maybe I can slide you into my American literature class that I teach for Worldwide, and we do it through a Humanistic STEM lens. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I am a PhD student at Embry-Riddle, and I, of course, love science fiction as much as I love my STEM courses and my research. I want to know, as an author, what are some recommendations for books that you have, of course, other than your own books, and perhaps, like, what are you reading right now?
Actually, I've still got some of my textbooks, and there's a shelf. I mean, there's Understanding Space was a book that I took orbital mechanics, and that I still reference now because it has a lot of good information when you're trying to just, even if you're not going to put the math and the technical details in the story, you need to get just your time frame. So you need to know a ship has to move to this transfer orbit to move. It's going to take this long to get this far out under this acceleration, and those calculations are all kind of available there that I can go through and fill those in now. And what's nice about that is that I can do it kind of quickly. I tried to use AI for a little bit on that, and it's been very good at giving me wrong information very confidently. And so I've just gone back to doing the calculation myself. Right now, I am reading a book called The Premonition Code, and then there's another one called Time Loops, because I'm working on a new series where there's a group of people have a genetic anomaly where they perceive time a little differently than the linear fashion that humans do, and they get little quick glimpses of probabilities a split second in the future, and that's kind of what the story revolves around. So now I'm kind of brushing up on all that.
You said that first one was Permission Code?
The Premonition Code.
Premonition Code. Okay, perfect. I'm writing this all down. Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? I was wondering, as an author, do you ever feel like you have to dial back on the technical or the scientific content that you put into your writing? It could be tempting to go into a lot of the physics of the engineering. Do you ever have to find yourself kind of editing yourself a bit?
Absolutely. And that is a natural tendency of when you have a pocket of knowledge that you're good at and it's time for it to shine, it's like you are going to learn something today, everybody. Like it's time for me to tell you about this. And then and I'll put it in there, and then I goes to the editor, and he's like, "You probably need about half this pulled out, or really dumb it down. We don't need to know." And sometimes it can really be a little kitschy, where you have your characters speaking to each other, doing the calculations, just because you want everybody to know how hard you worked on that. So over the time, I have found a good balance in being technically proficient and correct in what I write, but not having the need to, show them exactly how I got there.
Excellent. It looks like maybe we have one question in the chat. What is your writing schedule or process like?
So in the morning, I get up and I break it up into 30-minute sprints. There's a screenwriter, his name's Thomas Donnelly. He wrote a couple, Sahara's one of the big ones he did, and some of the Marvel stuff, but he has a really good process of, he calls it the downhill approach. So he writes for 30 minutes, and at the end of the 30 minutes, he just stops. And he stops in the middle of a sentence. And what he likens that to is, if you have kind of an old junker car, you got to park it on a hill, and then so you can get it going forward again and roll to start it, because it won't start otherwise. And having that sentence broken, you know exactly where you're going to go. So when you come back for your next writing sprint, you're already going downhill. You at least have one sentence and probably that paragraph in your mind of how that's going to go. So right now, my productivity at between 2,500 and 3,000 words a day, which is pretty good through the week. Once I'm down to editing and releasing, that will shift, because I'll chew up more time doing revisions, things like that, and then marketing. But for the most part, it's about a 2.5-hour workday, so it's not bad.
How do you choose the cover art for your books?
Just whatever catches my eye. Warship in particular was something, even the title I was going for. I try to catch something that, like, I would imagine you're walking through an airport and it would catch your eye. Simple title, simple cover. The Omega Force series with its two-pane design was actually, my cover artist came up with that. He gave 3 sort of concepts of the first one, and I liked that one, and then he just kept it throughout to keep it uniform. But usually I'll ask for what I've ended up doing is he's a good enough artist that I ask for the cover first, or about a quarter of the way through once I know the title. And then I try to craft a scene around what he drew for the cover. So it's incorporated into the book.
Great. It looks like we have another comment in the chat. Oh. All right. Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your time and expertise. We really appreciate it.
No, thank you, everybody. Thanks for the invite. Yeah, I appreciate it.